Hello, all you weirdos. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to Twisted Tales Tuesdays, where each episode I'm going to bring you along on a dark and twisted story. So today I have a special guest who has been nothing but supportive of my spooky obsession, my sister.
Hello.
And this is the first time that I am showing my face, so we don't know how to read our notes without looking at you, so bear with us. But I want you to imagine that we are living in the 1940s and you're feeling sad, you're feeling anxious, or you're just overall nonchalant about life in general. In today's world, we would go to the doctor and get put on medication, or we would just go see a therapist and talk through our problems. But it is the 1940s, so instead we go to the doctor and get prepped for surgery so the doctor can cut our skull open and slice parts of our brain in hopes that they aren't going too far. Wild, right? That's why this episode I'm giving you the twisted story of the lobotomy.
All right. So a lobotomy is a brain surgery, right, that severed the nerve pathways in the frontal lobes to treat mental illness. So your prefrontal cortex handles your planning, self-control, and complex emotions. And they thought that cutting or destroying the nerve fibers that connect that cortex to the rest of the brain would stop the mental illness. What they actually did was alter a person's brain function to make them more positive and apathetic. I'm going to sound like I'm bashing lobotomies, which, I mean, let's be honest, we all should. Because I think it was the dumbest thing in the world to attempt. While a lot of people had success with their lobotomies, others were not so lucky. The side effects were awful, and they were also irreversible. So why put someone and their families through that, right?
Lobotomies actually peaked in the 1940s to the 1950s before being abandoned, but it was the 1880s that marked early experimental psychosurgery when Swiss physician Gottlieb Burckhardt, he removed parts of the brain cortex in asylum patients to induce calmness. In 1935, it was Portuguese neurologist Antonio Moniz and his colleague Almeida Lima that developed the prefrontal lobotomy by drilling holes in the skull to cut the nerve fibers that connected the frontal lobes.
So my thing is who even back then would voluntarily submit themselves or a family member to have a drill put to their brain.
The Kennedys.
Don't.
Damn, bitch. There was a lot of people that actually did have success with their lobotomies, but I don't know. I guess back then when you're told one thing by a doctor, you believe it.
They also used to use LSD to treat things. So
That is true. That is true. American neurologist Walter Freeman and James Watts, they entered the brain game in 1936 when they performed the first lobotomy in the United States. It was actually Freeman who introduced the transorbital or the ice pick lobotomy in 1946.
Which is the one that most people think about when they think of lobotomies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite disgusting. He would insert a surgical tool through the eye socket into the frontal lobes without having to drill into the skull because, you know, that's just a lot better than drilling into a skull.
I wonder which one's less bloody.
I guess
they're not using huge drills when they do that, though. It's like, I mean, either way, you're going in through like a mucous membrane, you know?
Yeah.
I'll have to look at that next time.
Because there's also, isn't there like a lot of nerve endings? Because
There's a lot of blood vessels
pull
around
the
the eye.
eyelid and then go through the eyelid. I don't know. Throughout the U.S. and Europe, tens of thousands of procedures were performed to manage overcrowding in the psychiatric institutions and to treat conditions such as schizophrenia, depression, and severe anxiety. Side effects were as follows. Many suffered severe personality changes, apathy, loss of emotional depth, or cognitive impairment, and incontinent, and others developed an enormous appetite and gained a substantial amount of weight. Seizures were also common, and worst of all, others died.
does that not just make you, like, completely just...
And it's like you make one
No.
wrong snip or you go too far, just like a millimeter, and the person's done for. And you can't reverse that. That's what's crazy to me.
It wasn't until the 1950s that mental health awareness was on the up and up. It was still scratchy back then, but they realized the lobotomy was ridiculous, finally. The rise of effective psych medications such as antipsychotics and antidepressants rendered the surgery obsolete. The lobotomy was eventually banned or heavily restricted worldwide and said to be a dark mistake in medical history. Well, no shit.
No shit.
Reports actually show that more lobotomies were performed on women than men. These studies show that 60% of the surgeries performed in the U.S. were women and 74% performed in Ontario were female. So,
That's crazy.
but, let's just treat women's hysteria with picking their brains and then shoving LSD down their throat,
That is a good point. A lot of them
So
were
women
women,
have
so
always
it's
been
like,
a target in medicine.
that's a good point. Huh.
It's another thing you should cover.
Yeah. That's kind of dark and twisted. British psychiatrist Maurice Partridge, he conducted a follow-up study on 300 patients who received a lobotomy, and he concluded that the treatment achieved its effects by reducing the complexity of psyche life. And another British survey of lobotomy patients between 1942 and 1954 showed that 13% had a full recovery, 28% had a significant recovery, 25% had no change, and 4% died. I guess my beef really weighs with the way these doctors went about it. I still think something else could have been done other than drilling a hole in someone's head and possibly causing permanent damage. But this Walter Freeman guy really just pisses me off. He described one of his 29-year-old patients after the lobotomy as a quote-unquote smiling, lazy, and satisfactory patient with the personality of an oyster. This same patient was unable to remember Freeman's name and would endlessly pour coffee from an empty pot. And when her parents had difficulty dealing with her behavior after the surgery, Freeman actually advised them to use a
Satisfactory patient.
He actually told them to use a system of rewards like ice cream and punishments like smacks. So basically, he says, sorry that I botched your daughter's brain and turned her into an oyster, but slap her around and she'll be fine. Get the fuck out of here.
It's kind of like how parenting was back then.
Yeah, but that's like after they like physically damaged her freaking brain.
In the early 20th century, the number of patients in mental hospitals increased significantly when little medical treatment was available. So the lobotomy was one of the physical therapies at this time that was viewed as a break with psych culture. The purpose was to reduce the symptoms of mental disorders, and that was recognized as accomplished at the expense of the person's personality and intellect. Following the operation, spontaneity, responsiveness, self-awareness, and self-control were reduced and replaced by inertia, and patients most commonly left emotionally blunted and with a restricted range of intellect. Very often, patients would show detachment from society, but that's what I just don't get. If the surgery was to help depression and anxiety, why are all the drilling holes and going through people's eye sockets just for them to end up detached from society and completely just wash away their initiative and just intellect in life? Like,
Thrive for
you're
life.
taking away the very things that make them who they are.
Yeah.
And allow them to thrive in life.
All because they have depression.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just because they have depression, but... So, I also feel like you can't talk about lobotomies without talking about one of the most notable cases, Rosemary Kennedy. Rosemary was the sister of our past president, John F. Kennedy, and she was born to her mother, Rose, and her shit-ass dad, Joe Kennedy. It's always a Joe. Our brother's name is Joe.
Shout out.
What up, shithead? During her birth, the doctor wasn't immediately available for delivery. There was a case of, I think it was this Spanish influenza that was like outbreak. So the nurse held Rosemary in the birth canal for 2 hours before the doctor was available to come get her, which is outrageous and resulted in a harmful loss of oxygen. When she began to grow, she was not reaching basic developmental steps due to this early setback. And just as things were back then, telling people her daughter had an intellectual disability was out of the question. So, Rose, her mother, she never confided in friends or other family members about the struggles. It was only the immediate family that knew, and they tried to cover things up the worse that it got. So, by the age of 22, she was said to becoming increasingly irritable and difficult, and she would often explode into convulsion and fly into violent rages where she would hit and injure others. Her erratic behavior frustrated her parents, and of course, her father was worried that her behavior would shame and embarrass the Kennedy name and create damage for his or his kids' future careers. So instead of telling the world, hey, this is my daughter, she has been deemed intellectually disabled, but we love her and will stop at nothing to get her the help she needs, they continuously covered it up and kept her out of the public eye as much as possible.
So, then at the age of 23, doctors informed Joe Kennedy that a lobotomy would calm Rosemary's mood swings and stop her violent outburst, and decided to go forward with it. He didn't tell his wife, Rosemary's mother, anything about it until the surgery was complete and their daughter was botched. That Freeman guy we talked about earlier, yeah, he was actually in on this specific lobotomy, and he said that he gave her a mild tranquilizer and would ask her questions during the procedure. And he was also quoted saying, "We made an estimate on how far to cut based on how she responded." Unfortunately, when they realized that Rosemary became incoherent is when they stopped.
They botched her shit.
They fucked her shit up.
Yeah, they did. Rosemary's mental capacity diminished to that of a 2-year-old child. She could not walk or speak intellectually and was incontinent. And as if that wasn't...
aspect pissed her dad off. The incontinence. I'm sure that pissed him off.
Yeah, but they just stowed her away. And that she was like a vegetable.
He probably wasn't even dealing with it. No. Yeah, you're right.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, she became almost immediately institutionalized, where she lived out the rest of her life. So basically, he put her in an institution, and he paid for a house to be built for her on the institution's property and paid for around-the-clock care. So basically, just threw her away.
She had the presidential suite of that place.
So after realizing he just permanently botched his daughter's brain, Joe Kennedy decided to stash her away like she wasn't his problem anymore. Her siblings had no idea where she went. She just was whisked away, and they were told nothing about it. Her mother, Rose Kennedy, didn't even come visit Rosemary until 20 years later. Oh, and old Joe Kennedy?
Mother of the year.
Yeah, well, what about Joe? Because he didn't go and visit her at all. He didn't visit her not once since he stashed her away. It wasn't until Joe Kennedy died in 1969 that the family gradually started involving Rosemary in family life again, which good for them, or at least for the siblings. I still say shame on her mama. Rosemary eventually learned how to walk again, but she unfortunately never spoke clearly again. She died of natural causes in 2005 at the age of 86.
So, that's the dark and twisted story of the lobotomy. One of the darkest mistakes in medical history. If you have any other twisted tales you would like for us to do an episode on, drop a comment below. And until next time,
Bye!